to our 7th episode of the Sacred Gut Punch podcast. I'm Dr. Tomi White-Bryan. I'm a coach and consultant in human and organizational performance and the creator of Emotional Intelligence 3.0, a system for achieving extraordinary performance. Today's guest is a delightful human being, Grace Boda, a dear friend who lives up to her name. She's always Grace personified. I met her, hard to believe, Grace, over a decade ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah, through a group of colleagues. And Grace, there's no small talk. We just jump right in to what is your sacred gut punch, Grace, that you want to share with our listeners?
This one's about the estrangement that I experienced from my entire family, really more like an exile than an estrangement, and sort of how I've navigated that over the course of the decades since that happened.
Grace, I think it's quite profound that it was more than just an estrangement. It was an exile. What do you see as the difference between those two things before you tell us more of the background?
I guess in my mind, why I use that word is I think about estrangement as a breach in relationship between two individuals. And I think of an exile. In this case, when I say I was exiled from my family, what I mean is it was not my decision. And it rolled out from a challenge in a relationship with one individual, but that resulted in kind of a wall of communication that cut me off from all contact with my entire family, both immediate and extended, all my relatives, family, friends, neighbors, everyone really who knew me as I was growing up, as I was a small person. So this happened when I was 32. So it happened when I was a young adult.
So first of all, Grace, I'm really sorry that happened. What a rough thing. I don't care if you're 12, 32, or 62. That's just a difficult thing, I think, to navigate. And I think it's one of the reasons why I was attracted to you over a decade ago is your beautiful ability to give language to what happened without it feeling like a wound. It felt very different when you told us about the estrangement or exile. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, completely makes sense. I don't view it as a wound. It was certainly a gut punch, some decades ago, but I've had 32 years since then to go through the healing process and my own kind of deep dive into reflection and ability to see my participation in it and all the things that sort of liberated me from a feeling of having been wounded in some way. For me, the gut punch of it wasn't so much the breach in relationship between me and the individual who initiated this. The gut punch, I think, was the loss of all the cherished relationships I had with so many people who didn't have the courage to sort of come up against that line in the sand or step across it in service of maintaining relationship with me. That full exile lasted for about 25 years. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, one of my siblings and a handful of relatives and family friends did step over that line. And many of them on condition that our relationship be conducted in absolute secrecy so that it wouldn't get back to the person who, because it would be made so difficult for them by the person who initiated the exile. So I do have contact with a handful of people from my past now.
Grace, it's profound that one person could draw that line in the sand and tell others not to breach it, and they do so.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot under there. There's a lot under there. But, the way that I see it is, and, it's an interesting reflection to be making now at this point in our experience as a society, as a culture too, because this is happening more and more where there's some kind of a rift, a difficult experience. In my case, in this situation, I spoke about the impact of my father's alcoholism on me and on our family. He had been dead for 7 or 8 years by now. But that statement was so difficult for my mother to be with, that, at least the way I view it, I have no idea what she was thinking, but the way I
Mhm.
imagine it to be is that she had no other recourse, like no capacity or available strategy for being with that, except to exile the source of it, to exile me. So when I think about what's going on in so many families in our larger culture, where people more and more often, it seems, don't have, this is why your work is so important, Tomi, don't have the emotional intelligence or the relational resourcefulness to maintain presence with each other in the difference of points of view or opinions. There's sometimes, I think, where estrangement is an appropriate that kind of hard boundary is appropriate when we're not physically safe, or where something is so damaging and so intractable. It seems like we set those kinds of boundaries when we don't know what else to do. There's nothing else that we know how to
Mm.
do. And I think that's what was going on with my mother at the time that this happened. And sadly, as you know, Tomi, alcoholism went on to claim the lives of all of my siblings. I
Oh.
say all like there's a whole bunch of them. There was two, but
Yeah, but still, it got all of them, right?
well, it's striking to me because I'm the eldest and I'm the last one left standing. There are no more, because alcoholism took them all.
Yeah, but Grace, let me interrupt you here.
Mhm.
Do you think that your ability to speak it out loud, to call it out in the family system, obviously enraged your mother enough that she banished you from the system? She exiled you from the system. But that was maybe the key to your survival, not to succumb to it like your siblings had?
Yeah, I do in many ways think that the fact that I did not continue to participate in the family system for the last 32 years, enabled me to do some really important healing that I needed to do and was just beginning back when this period was going on 30 some odd years ago. That healing was really critical in enabling me to live a healthy, happy, fulfilled, well life. And so, in part, the estrangement enabled that for me, but it also was a catalyst for some really important inner healing and growth. And I'd like to say something about that because I think it's critical to know that for us to remember, I think, or at least I'll just say this for myself. For me, I remember always that every experience in my life, no matter how difficult, is an opportunity for me to continue to engage more and more awareness and to bring higher and higher levels of my own consciousness to it, so that not to escape it, but to bring more good in through my actual lived experience of my life and my relationships. And as you know, this might be a good time to tell the story that set the context for how my view came to be what it was. Just really briefly, at age 6 in first grade, I had what I'll call an initiatory experience that changed the entire course of my life, or it set me on a course in my life and offered me the perspective through which I view absolutely every experience I have. And I think that perspective is what enabled me to engage this gut punch and every gut punch I've had in life in a way that's ended up, because we all take a few, in the course of our lives, right?
Yes. It's never just one, Grace. It's never just one.
No, I mean, it's just life, life includes the good things and the hard things.
Yeah.
But anyway, when I was 6 years old in first grade, I had an experience during recess where I'm out on the field looking for four-leaf clovers, doing what a 6-year-old girl does, and minding my own business. And suddenly, I have no idea what brought it on, but suddenly I had this experience of being completely liberated from the perception of being in a body with an identity. And instead, I was perceiving, it was sort of like a field of luminous benevolence. It was like everything was scintillating light. And I was all of that. And I was perceiving everything from everywhere all at once. And it was all so benevolent and so good. And in my little 6-year-old mind, it wasn't my 6-year-old mind that was perceiving this, but in the awareness that I had at that time, I just felt that I understood that, oh, this goodness is the substance, this beautiful, like, light that is. I don't even have words. Words fall apart in this because it's just not language, it's kind of experience. This is the ineffable I'm trying to give words to. But that this was like the substance of all life, all experience, and all people, all beings, all rocks, everything was just made of this substance, that it was realer than the reality, quote unquote, reality that I experienced in my normal perception. So I'm in this blissful, ecstatic experience, and the recess bell rings, and boom, I'm back, pigtails and skin knees, and thinking, like, what just happened? What was that? And of course, that set me for the rest of my life on a course of wanting to reconcile. How could it be both true that we all are, each and every one of us, and all that exists is this incredibly beautiful, unitive, ecstatic kind of experience, and also, that boundlessness? How could we be this boundless, luminous reality and also these very limited, clunky, selves that we are as individual beings? And I just committed, at 6, like, I'm going to figure that out in this lifetime.
I love the beauty and bravery and courage of the 6-year-old mind. I'm going to figure this thing out.
Totally. 6-year-old, and 3-year-olds, all those beings that we are when our hearts are so full of love and courage and dedication and idealism. So I committed to that. And there were many other experiences like that or related to that I had over the course of my life. And something that I did come to realize through those experiences was that it wasn't the flashiness or the kind of wow, nature of those experiences that mattered. It was what they pointed to, what they implied about reality and about self and about what we all are together here in this experience. So that gave me a particular lens because I had committed, I'm going to figure this out in this lifetime. I just 6 years old, like, this is what this life's going to be about. I am going to realize how it is that I can be all of that in this body. And so that was a lens that I looked through. So as all the gut punches rolled out, sure, my heart broke at times. Sure, I was disappointed and my feelings were hurt and things like that. But I also kept bringing it back into that inquiry. Like, how could it be if every person on this planet, every rock, every tree, every bird, including my mother and all my family members, everybody is made of this stuff? How do I reconcile that with the messy way that my family's showing up and that I showed up in it in the first period after this happened? So that perspective helped me to know. I'll just say something that rolled out from that perspective is I was absolutely clear from that 6-year-old dedication. I was absolutely clear. The purpose of, you're never clearer than first grade. So,
Hey, isn't there a book about? No, it's kindergarten. Everything I needed to know about life, I learned in kindergarten. You learned it in first grade,
I
Grace.
was a slow learner. So, but I knew after that experience, it just evaporated. What it showed me was the purpose of my life absolutely is not and never has been to stay comfortable and never be challenged and make sure everything goes my way. I knew, like, if I'm gonna realize this, the answer to my question here, that I'm gonna have to get uncomfortable. So when uncomfortable things happen, I viewed it as opportunities, not always right away. I'm human. I go through my reactions and things until I get my feet on the ground, but I would always see it as an opportunity, like, oh, there's something here that's more than I can see right now. And I know that all of life, the fabric of reality of every person and of me and of life itself, is benevolent. So there's something in this beyond what it appears to be. So I would at least open my mind to my current understanding. This isn't the limit of it. There is more here than meets the eye. And that helped me keep the spaciousness to engage this in a way that allowed me to move through the stages. First of my, it wasn't pretty right away,
It took a little while, Grace.
No, initially I judged all the people who didn't have the courage to stand with me. I judged the person who initiated this exile. I didn't see my part in it and I didn't take any responsibility for it.
Mm.
It took some time and some intentional healing to really begin to see how I participated, not just in that dynamic, but how I went on. You might not be surprised to know, coming from the kind of family, constellation that I came from, that I went on to find myself in an intimate partnership and with a friend or two in my life who replicated those dynamics. And I was doubling down on the same strategies I used as a kid to try to get a hold of them. So,
Oh, Grace, we want to know how did doubling down work for you?
have you done that? Oh my gosh. I would find myself like a moth to flame, attracting emotionally unstable and addicted people. And then the doubling down was, I will compromise my well being. I will do whatever it takes to stabilize you.
Mhm.
And I will overfunction for everybody who's unreliable because I'm going to work like crazy to get myself a different past, to have it turn out differently. Of course, that didn't work. Yeah.
So, Grace, that's really powerful what you just said. I will double down, right? I will sacrifice who I am to stabilize this system.
Mhm.
How many you're a coach like I am. How many coaching clients have we seen do that?
Yeah.
Not recognizing, one of my favorite questions in coaching is, what's mine to do? Translation to the client, is this yours to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, was stabilizing the system, Grace, yours to do?
This was some of the deepest part of the healing for me. When I would find myself in the presence of somebody who required or asked, and I would comply with it, all kinds of compromises on my part that didn't serve my well being, I finally learned to recognize. So this is back now, we're in my mid 30s, somewhere 30 years ago. But I eventually learned to recognize, oh, this is familiar. I've seen this before. I've seen this movie. And so I would be able to stop and say to myself, this isn't about this person in front of me right now. I can let them off the hook. This isn't about them. This is something I didn't finish a long time ago. I put it on a back shelf because it was too big for me when I was a child, but I have the resources now. Like I can really look at this. And I realized that the story I was telling myself, like, oh, I'm being helpful. I'm helping to stabilize this emotionally unstable person. I realized this is not, if I'm really honest, that's not motivated by true help. That's motivated by me trying like crazy to avoid feeling what being in the presence of an unstable person causes me to feel because I didn't let myself feel it as a little kid. It would come roaring back as an adult, and I did not want to feel that. So it was more like, I really, really, really desperately need you to stop doing what you're doing so I don't have to feel what I feel.
It was your shield. It's a shield, right?
Absolutely. And it cost me
Wow.
so much. Yeah. So there was a lot of deep healing. And I think the other one about what you're saying, is it really yours to do? I think some of the deepest healing that I did was when I finally got down through the layers to the grief that I couldn't save my family. I continued to watch my mother creating suffering for herself and others. I watched from afar both of my brothers drink themselves to death,
Mm,
leaving
mm.
teenagers behind. I watched all this and I realized there's nothing I can do about that. It was really clear because nobody would even speak to me. So, one of those brothers was in secret contact with me. So we got to have a nice relationship in the last years of his life. But I didn't get to be with him as he died. There was literally nothing I could do.
Mm.
You know, I think where it really came clear to me was there was a period where I went on a letter writing campaign to my mom because I really wanted to generate or to make this space for there to be peace between us because she's older. And I thought, I want to be able to give her a better death than she's creating for herself. I want her to have peace. It took me a minute to realize how arrogant that is. It really, I cannot give her, I can't give anybody a different death than they're already having. So
It felt good for a second, right? Just 1 second, Grace.
for a minute, because that's what all those coping strategies are, is an aspect of us who just want so much to have control over what we can't control. And when I really dropped under that and I felt that grief, I realized, I think someone else has said this somewhere, but it makes so much sense to me. Grief is love that has nowhere to go.
Mm.
So it doesn't matter how people behave. A child will love their parents, and the family they came from. And when I realized, oh, this is the grief, and so many are experiencing this now, and the estrangements that are happening in our culture, where it can be grief because there's nowhere for the love to go because we don't have physical access. A person has died, or they're incarcerated, or something like that. Or it can be we don't have the relational and emotional intelligence kind of capacities with each other to be able to even communicate. And in extreme forms of that, the only strategy is exile. So when I got down to that and really did the work in myself to accept this enormous love that that child self in me came into this planet with for people and for life, and that I had still as an adult have for my family, for every member of my family, and to have that have nowhere to go, and to be able to accept I can change no one's choices, and I have to be able to honor everyone's path even when I see it creating suffering. I can be, and this is so important. I did all this kind of work before I became a coach, but it enables me to be in healthy service to those that I work with when I can understand what's mine, what's not mine, what I can support, and where are the limits of my capacity to influence a person's how they create their journey. And it means that I have to continually support myself to grow the capacity to stabilize my nervous system and be able to be present to another's suffering when they're choosing it, and understand what I can bring is my own presence, which can enable and make possible things if a person wants them. And if not, I need just sort of honor that soul's choices and path.
I love this concept of healthy service. I do a lot of work with values around the globe, and I always want to stop and talk to the people who have the value be of service
Hmm.
and how they may use that as a tool or as a weapon, right?
Mm,
And that be of service when it's what we call below the line, right? Imbalanced, emotionally imbalanced. It's a weapon. You're using it against yourself and others.
yeah,
And so when you can have that healthy service, right? That's where we're really doing what's ours to do, aren't we?
yeah,
I mean, that's what I hear you saying when I that being of healthy service. And I think part of the gift of healthy service is the practice of being without needing to change.
yeah.
And that's where we get, I think, sideways with ourselves. We want to help. We want
Yeah.
to make it better. We want to do something.
And I think in that impulse to want to do something, it's a really, at least in my life, it has been a really fruitful kind of inquiry to just drop into my own, bring presence to myself first, drop into my own being and see if I can find out, why does this impulse feel so urgent to me right now? Why am I feeling this so strongly? And most of the time, what I find is because watching this other person suffer, it sort of awakens something in me that's so uncomfortable for me that I want to stop that feeling in me by fixing their suffering, by getting
Mhm.
them out of suffering. It's partly one and it's partly the other. We want good for others, and we're trying not to feel the things that we feel. And so I think there's enormous value, especially for those of us who support other people's process, in gaining capacity to be present to our own suffering and to our own grief and heartbreaks, and to be able to, and this is where that 6-year old experience and all the ones that came after have really helped me, because they gave me increasing tastes of the kind of peace in my being that is unshakable. It wasn't unshakable at 6. I just got the taste, but I still wanted the world to make me happy, and, everybody to cooperate with my sense of the way it should be, all that stuff. And I still have that in me. I've still got an ego, but it's become more unshakable as time has gone by and as I've grown and matured. So with that in place, I can be unshakably at peace, fundamentally well, and also my heart can break. My human heart can feel all kinds of things. Joy and grief and anger and sorrow, like all of that can happen, but it doesn't define who I am, and it doesn't capture or take over my awareness, because simultaneously in the very ground of my awareness is that kind of fundamental peace. And so when we do that reflection for ourselves, what's coming up for me is we gradually, I think of it as purifying the container, as we gradually purify the container, so that we're not so driven projecting our stuff onto somebody else and trying to fix it over there. If we take responsibility for it in ourselves, we do the kind of healing that makes it possible for us to be that available, like you're talking about, to truly be with someone.
That's so beautiful, Grace. I call it emptying the emotional well, right? You said purifying the container. And part of what I've realized in my work is actually there are levels of this purification, right? There's the cognitive, right? The mind, right? We cognitively forgive our parent for exiling us. And then at some point there's an emotional release about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the body hangs on to these things.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's that third level of really letting go at the cellular body level kind of place. And I have been engaging that embodied piece for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And, Grace, you have 2 grandchildren. My third one was born a week ago. And up in Maryland, which is, 5.5 hour drive from where I live in North Carolina. And I was driving home, and something about his birth has shattered me. And I was driving home, and what came to me, and I think this is part of the levels of that grieving and letting go. With my mom, I took care of her for the last 20 years of her life. And as I'm driving, I'm alone with my thoughts for 5.5 hours. That can always be frightening. And I'm just crying. I'm crying all the way home. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And what I realized is when my mother died, I was exhausted. And my tears were tears of exhaustion.
Mm.
They were not tears of grief.
Wow.
Right? And that 5.5 hour drive home was me 7 years later, finally grieving what I lost. Right? Finally grieving. And I was so surprised by that, Grace. And I wonder if you've had any experiences like that with this sacred gut punch. Have these been the levels? What are the levels you've gone through to make peace with? And obviously, peace. The divine Tomi made peace with my mother's death ages ago, but the human Tomi, for some reason, didn't.
Yeah, I hear what you're asking. And, I think it's just beautiful what you're talking about you were already a grandmother, but you welcomed another grandchild. And, the birth of a child into our family is such a powerful and beautiful and moving experience. And I think it tends to shake the snow globe a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that analogy.
Whatever's sort of under there. I can't tell you how many times I have felt like I am complete with this experience. I've minded, I've healed everything, I'm good. I've thought that many, many times. And, there's these deepening spirals, I think, that have to do because I'm talking about a relationship of mother and daughter. So as the generations unfold, like for example, when this exile happened, my children were 2 and 3. And so as they went through different transitions and I watched my friends, kind of celebrating different life moments with their children, with their mother, and seeing grandparents really involved with our grandchildren, there was a period of my kids don't have that on my side of the family. And then there were other periods, and I would kind of work with that and feel like, okay, I've grieved the mother I didn't have. I've grieved the things that will never be. There, feel done. And then my daughter became a mother and it shook the snow globe. And because I got to be everything for my daughter and her children, beyond my wildest dreams, really, the way that I've been able to participate as a grandmother in that family system and to realize this holy, precious role that grandparents can have in helping a new soul land and a new family form. And it's just been beautiful. And then I have another layer of like, oh, well, my mom never got to experience that. And it's less often now that I think I didn't get to experience something. It's more often like, oh, she never got to experience that. And I hear from my friends whose children have decided not to have children or who don't have children themselves, and they're actually grieving not being able to have this grandparent experience. And that's not to say everyone, this is not a judgment on anybody who does or doesn't have children, but just that that grandparent experience is so potent. And so then I do another round of kind of having, and so I realize these spirals of the gut punches that we get are like these deepening spirals. I'm going to say they're never ending, not in a bad way, but that it's like this deep well that can always go deeper and deeper because there are these invitations into any place in our life and our conception of ourselves and our identity where we have constricted, where we've kind of crystallized in some judgment that things should be this way and not that way, or this need to kind of protect and defend, what we've identified with. And so as we loosen that, we keep getting taken into subtler and subtler kinds of loosenings that happen. So they're not all gut punches anymore, but they're deepening, deepening, deepening kinds of openings and into more life and more love.
Yeah. Excavating that deeper truth, right?
Yeah. And liberating more capacity for presence and for love and for enjoyment of our own lives. And it's paradoxical because when it's first happening, we think, oh, I lost something in my life, like my life has become constricted in some way.
Yeah.
And that's not to minimize, that is a gut punch, like there really was
Yeah.
hurt.
Yeah.
But as we go deeper into it, my experience anyway has been, and granted, I'm 32 years past this exile, I've had a lot of time for this process, is that especially in the most painful kinds of losses in our lives, over time and with deep healing, they tend to turn themselves inside out. And not that they're not still losses, but they also offer the most beautiful, comprehensive kinds of blessings that I think I've experienced.
I love that. It shifts from the sacred gut punch to a blessing. That's quite remarkable. Well, Grace, what would you offer our listeners as sort of your best advice or something that sustained you outside of this experience you had at 6? Was there something you repeatedly told yourself or some wisdom you can offer people who are experiencing this deep estrangement from those they love?
This would apply, I think, to any gut punch, whether it's estrangement or anything else. But something that has helped me enormously in the healing process is taking radical responsibility for my experience, which does not mean taking responsibility for harm that somebody else caused, but it does mean my experience of that harm is 100% in my own wheelhouse. And when I take responsibility for it, I have to look at how do I continue to participate in that dynamic? How do I keep hauling it forward with me and leaning on things that, a less evolved part of me used to do? And how can I untangle that and use whatever kinds of experiences I have in the present moment to keep opening up and healing? Because that gut punch just showed me a place in me where I was constricted.
Mm.
And so I can keep opening that up, and it doesn't take the participation of the other person. I feel 100% in complete forgiveness with my mother. I wish her so much good, so much well being, fundamental peace, a beautiful transition. I wish her all kinds of good things. I have complete forgiveness with her, and she hasn't participated in that at all. So it doesn't take the other person's participation. We can turn any of these gut punches around into just remarkable healing.
Mm.
With or without the other. It would be beautiful if we had the other's participation, but sometimes we don't have that choice.
Grace, so beautiful. Thank you for the gift of your presence for our listeners. And I have always, like I said, been so profoundly impressed with the way that you've carried this for as long as I've known you. And to share the wisdom of how you did that with our listeners means so much to me. And hopefully they can find a place within your story that resonates with them that will allow them to find some healing as well. So thank you for the gift of being on the show. Love you dearly and really appreciate it.
Oh, love you too, Tommy. Thank you for the conversation. And I too hope that everyone experiencing any kind of gut punch can feel the opening up, into what it makes possible.
Yes. Thank you, Grace.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Sacred Gut Punch. I'd like to thank our sponsors who make this podcast possible, the EI 3.0 companies of Bryan Insights and the Center for Emotional Well-Being, and of course, always to my husband, attorney Jim Bryan. Thank you for your endless support and love. I love you to the moon and back, Jimmy. If you're finding inspiration in the stories, please like and subscribe to the podcast and share with your friends and family who can benefit from these stories of resilience and rising. And if you're experiencing a sacred gut punch, remember, while you may feel alone, you are not. Help is out there. If you or someone you know is in crisis and considering suicide or self-harm, please seek support. Call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988, or chat at 988lifeline.org. And if you're not in the United States, Befrienders worldwide at befrienders.org can help you. Until next time, dear ones, may you use the difficulty as you rise with grace.